Shall we? All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shan from the Kiwi Landing Pad, and today we're on our Kiwi Founder webinar. Super excited to announce and have Victoria Ransom with us. She was the founder and CEO of Wildfire Interactive and arguably one of New Zealand's best entrepreneurs. They sold the company to Google, I think, in 2012. And we're going to get in and just kind of have a chat about you and your background, and then some of the things you learned in being an entrepreneur in your journey, because I know that you've built and scaled a few businesses. And so, yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So I grew up on a farm in Bulls, which is just outside of Palmerston North. Actually, not even Bulls. Bulls was like 15 minutes away from where I grew up. Very rural. Stop me if this takes too long. I'll try not to go too slow. In my last year of high school, I applied for and got a scholarship to study at an international school in the US. So that's what took me to the US. Ended up doing college in the US. I studied psychology. I got to the end of my degree and really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. So I decided to work for an investment bank. So I moved to New York and worked for Morgan Stanley. This was in the year 2000, 2001. So that was sort of my first, I guess, touch point with entrepreneurship. That was right sort of towards the tail end of the dot-com boom. And at that time, investment banks were investing in lots of startups. So I had the opportunity to meet with startups. I think that was the first time it occurred to me that you could start your own business and create your own job. And so that, coupled with the fact that investment banking really wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, I wasn't passionate about it, led me to leave Morgan Stanley in September 2001 to start an online travel business. It was an adventure travel company called Access Trips. And the concept behind the company was basically that we would teach you to improve in or learn a new sport like snowboarding or surfing or mountain biking while traveling to some exotic country in the world. So it was an interesting time to start that company. September 11th happened 11 days after I left my job, my stable, well-paid job, to start a travel business. But there was no turning back at that point. Moved back to New Zealand and spent about 5 years building Access Trips, which was a reasonably successful company. It wasn't like a rapidly scalable, rapidly growing business like Wildfire ended up being, the next company, but it was a really great company to sort of learn the ins and outs of growing a business. And in particular, it became really pivotal for two reasons. One is, while we were running Access Trips, we got to the point where we really we started getting more customers than we could handle with basic tools like spreadsheets, and we needed some kind of customer relationship and booking management software. We couldn't find anything that was out there, so we ended up building something ourselves. And so that was the first experience of building software. I made plenty of mistakes, happy to talk about what those mistakes were, but it was a way to sort of cut our teeth on building software, and discovered that we really liked building software. So that was the first thing that was important. The second thing is that it was actually Access Trips that ended up directly leading us to start Wildfire, but I'll talk about that in a minute. In 2006, moved back to the US, put a manager in place to run Access Trips, and actually went to business school in the US. And during that time, this is the end of 2007, Facebook launched their brand pages for businesses. And we thought that would be a great place to create a presence for Access Trips. And really our core target customer base was really the customer base or user base of Facebook at that time. So we created a brand page for Access Trips, and then very quickly discovered that there was very little that you could do to engage your audience on Facebook. You couldn't measure who they were, whether they're engaging. You had no way to capture their information, build a relationship. So we figured that there could be an opportunity to build some kind of tool that would help us to create a more engaging Facebook page experience. So we started with what we thought might just be a little side project, basically a way to run a giveaway competition on a Facebook page. We're largely doing that for ourselves, but figured let's build it in a way where other businesses can use it. and then discovered that there was some interest from other businesses to use that. And I guess to cut a long story short, we then really expanded our vision to create a complete platform for managing your presence, your business presence on social platforms. Graduated from business school in the summer of 2008. Yeah. And at that point decided to dedicate ourselves full-time to what was then called Wildfire. And to cut a long story short, I guess 3.5 years later, we'd built the company to 400 employees. We were in 8 different locations or 8 different offices around the world. And as you already mentioned, we ended up selling to Google in the summer of 2012.
Awesome. Very cool story. I actually want to jump back to Access Trips, because there's a few things in there that I thought were pretty curious, especially for our community. So you kind of mentioned that you actually scaled Access Trips quite a lot using spreadsheets and kind of basic technology and tools before you built something. How big were you before you started building? Like, what I'm trying to get to is like, at what point do people build, and should you test first and sort of get product market fit if you can, and then build? So talk about that a little bit.
Well, see, in our case, it was a little different, that we were just simply building that product for ourselves, for our own use in that company. So if we had have been building a booking software for the travel industry, which is something we actually subsequently did decide to do. I skipped that part in the story largely because we built a product like that, and just before we launched, we realized that Wildfire was the biggest success, or could have been the biggest success, and we focused on that full time. So I think in our case, it was more a case that we left it probably a little long in our own business, in terms of, it was more an operational issue. So it was less of a product market fit issue, and it was more of an operational issue of, when do you bring technology solutions into your own business in order to make it more efficient and operationalize it. And we probably left that a little long in that particular business. Having said that, it wasn't a rapidly scaling business. So I would say we didn't face the kind of scaling challenges that we faced with Wildfire, where we were adding, sometimes we were adding 20 employees a week. And that's when we definitely made some scaling and operational mistakes.
What were some of those scaling and
mistakes? Oh, there are so many. But I think some of the things we did wrong, it was putting in the right, when you're a startup, I think, or at least we really wanted to stay flat, and you hated the idea of hierarchy or anything that's had any kind of smell of bureaucracy or large company-ness. But actually, when you're growing your company at that rate, you do need to have things like managers in place, and you do need leadership. So I think we kept the organization too flat. And so that when we really did need to hire more leaders and managers, what we actually tried to do is promote people from within the company, which was great. That was really good, but it left, I'm thinking right now about our sales organization, where we really needed to bring managers in to support our salespeople. We sort of plucked from some of our best salespeople, which was fine, except we didn't have the bench of sales talent below to make up for that loss of taking active salespeople and putting them in management positions. So I remember we saw a drop in sales for a few months until we got a handle on that. Even things like, another thing I remember, our employees really wanting to have more of a career path, even things that you think suck, but they really wanted it, like performance management and understanding how they're doing and getting regular reviews and things like that, that sort of all related to hiring the right people at the right time, developing your employees, firing people at the right time. We certainly made some mistakes along the way in that area.
And out of curiosity, how did you build a successful travel company? It's got to be one of the hardest companies to actually build. And like, why did you get into that?
So we got into it because it was an area of personal interest. So I loved to snowboard and rock climb, or I did. I'm not much of a rock climber now, but I was learning to surf and really felt that there was a gap in the market for people like myself, who was a young professional who had enough money that I could wanted a nice experience, not just, being in a campground with a bunch of teenagers on a surf trip, but really wanted to learn and improve in a sport. So I would say it was, as compared to, I'd give a very different answer now about how should you think about starting a business? What's the right opportunity? But back then it was really just, investment banking sucks. This seems like a really fun thing to do. Let's try it out. And you're right, it was not an easy space. So we developed a moderately successful lifestyle business, I would say, versus something that could ever have really scaled at a rapid rate. Simply because the market size was too small, there was too much competition, and it was just very hard to scale because, for each new trip that we launched, in the end we had about 40 trips in 20 countries, but every new trip that we launched was almost as hard to launch as the previous trip. There wasn't a whole lot of sort of, what you got from the learning couldn't accelerate you a whole lot.
Awesome. If you guys have any questions, just start popping them underneath the video on the Ask a Question button, and we'll get to those soon. This is kind of a weird question, but how do you decide between lifestyle and ambition and sort of scaling companies? Like, how do you make that decision? Like, I'm a founder, I can either, I'm comfortable with my business and it is a lifestyle business, or I want to go big and find an opportunity that
Yes, that's a really good question. I think, it's partly your personal preference, what you're sort of looking for in your life. But I also think the market and the competitive dynamics dictate to that to a pretty large extent. So Wildfire, for example, couldn't have been just a so-called lifestyle business, whatever that even means, but because it was a hyper-competitive space where other companies were raising money, a lot of money, and it was very much a sort of, we were pretty early to the market, so you either got in and you built yourself up big pretty quickly, or you got basically completely left behind. So in that case, you really had to move fast, you had to grow aggressively, and we didn't raise a lot of money, but we certainly had to raise some money in order to keep up with all the money that our competitors were raising. So I do think the space and industry you're in probably dictates it to a large extent, versus on the flip side, Access Trips, we wouldn't have been able to really raise money for a business like that. It wasn't a hyper growth. It was crowded, but it wasn't a sort of do or die, grow it now or you won't succeed, huge room to scale it really big. It wasn't that kind of business. So it was always going to be more of a bootstrapped kind of a business.
Did you have to make any sort of compromises or choices that were kind of difficult when you were like, yeah, we're going to go big with Wildfire? When you're in that mode, you're like, okay, do or die, we've got to go for it. How did you sort of get that clear in your mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, even just, so we resisted raising venture capital for quite a long time, and we actually, which was fairly unusual, we got the business launched, we had customers, and we even got to profitability without raising money, although, it was a team of 7 or 8 people. It wasn't so hard to manage to make it profitable, but still that was really unusual because we loved what we were doing and we loved having full decision-making control, and we didn't want to have to raise money and have a board and feel like we were answerable to somebody else. So that was we resisted actually for quite a long time raising money, and then eventually we did, and that was a hard decision to make, but in the end it sort of felt like we had to, I guess. So it was it felt like the right decision. I think we were sure it was the right decision in the end, but nevertheless it was one that took us a while to get there, and we sort of felt a little nostalgic about having to make it, I guess.
Awesome. I want to talk about competition and being competitive. One of my observations of working with New Zealand companies is we're not necessarily very competitive because we don't have to be. And so how do you, we can be individually competitive, but we're not competitive as companies, a nation and a country. how did you learn about that, or how did you sort of kind of flip when you, because Silicon Valley, or where you live now, like, it is aggressive. You kind of have to be the best, and there is this like enoughness cycle that goes on in the Valley, which is quite weird. How did you deal with that?
Well, I guess nothing encourages competitiveness like the fact that you might die on any given day. Your company, not yourself. I mean, so it was sort of do or die. Like, we either had to work our butts off and be aggressive and really aggressively grow a business, or we were just going to get left behind and we would, the business would fail. So I think that, it was sort of just, it was really just a necessity of the business, I'd say.
So we have some questions coming through. So from Brett, so he's keen to hear about your experience taking Wildfire from early product market fit to scale. How did you find scalable channels to market? What were your best early hires for growth? And how did you fund that growth?
All right. So product market fit, a few things. We created a really simple initial prototype for Wildfire. It took us about 4 weeks to build it. And then we got it out. It was free. We never intended to charge for that product. It was clearly not a complete product, but it was enough to get it out there and start seeing how companies reacted to it. So I guess, that was the first thing we did. We tried to get something in the hands of companies as quickly as we could. Seeing the reaction to that and seeing that there was a reasonable amount of interest in that, that's when we started working on building the more extensive product, which took us 1.5 years, I guess, to get to market. And at that point, then we really worked very, very hard. So this sort of gets more to the distribution piece, to get those initial customer logos, basically. So, we were not concerned about making money off of our first clients. We were concerned about trying to get the best possible brands that we could to come out and try our product. So, the first 2 companies that I remember working with, one was Facebook and one was Pepsi, which was pretty awesome. But I stayed up for 3 nights, all night, without sleeping pretty much, maybe a couple of hours here or there, working on a launch project for Facebook, for example, because it was so worth it. So, getting those initial reference customers was really, really critical. And then in terms of marketing channels, we aggressively tried everything, but PR ended up being really, really important. Our product being viral in nature was really, really important. And what I mean by that is, basically, if any company launched a campaign with Wildfire, at the bottom of the campaign, so that maybe they're doing some kind of giveaway, at the bottom of that campaign, it would be powered by Wildfire with a link through to our site. So if a company ran a giveaway and 5,000 people entered it, 5,000 people were exposed to Wildfire. And in any given campaign, a number of those were businesses themselves. They clicked through, they signed up for Wildfire, and they tried the product. So trying, the fact that we had that viral loop in our product was really, really critical. I'm trying to think of, our business got grown largely through a very aggressive sales strategy. So we got really good at hiring, incentivizing, and educating sales team to really build out our business. I don't know if I answered all parts of that question. There are a lot of parts to it, but if I missed something, let me know.
Brett, if you have anything follow up, let me know. That's really interesting. I kind of would like to just get your thoughts on like being in San Francisco and sort of how you built those. You're obviously a little bit different because you went to school in the US, but how did you build those early relationships with Facebook and Pepsi? And, you've got a bit of a talent for building those sorts of relationships now. Yeah. What's your advice for companies that need to do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think we had a leg up in that about a year after we launched the business, we applied for the Facebook fund. and it was a fund that Facebook established to support businesses that were doing interesting things in the Facebook platform. And we ended up being one of the companies that was a winner of the Facebook fund. And so through that, we got to know Facebook. That's how we developed the Facebook relationship. And actually through that relationship, Facebook introduced us to some of their customers that were trying to do interesting things on the Facebook platform. So, I guess the takeaway from that is apply to as many incubators, business competitions, things like that as you can. Because I must say we almost didn't apply to the Facebook fund. I was on vacation and it was the day before the entry was due. And I still remember being like, is this really worth it? And we did it. And but before that, there was a year before that where we were still reaching out to companies and getting them to try out our product. And for that, I used my business school network a fair bit. But the other thing we did actually, so this is maybe more applicable for people who don't necessarily have the right business school network or whatever, is we at the time, lots of businesses didn't have Facebook pages yet. We thought about what companies seem like the very best fit for having a presence on Facebook. And we thought, anyone that works with celebrities or really cool brands would just be a natural fit for Facebook. And tons of them didn't even have a Facebook page at that point. So I remember like Nixon watches, we went in and created a Facebook page for them. We created a Facebook page for Pink, the musician, and those are the two that come to mind. But we created a bunch of them, and then we went and we used our software to build a little giveaway on their Facebook page. And then we did everything we could to find the right email address for the marketing person that worked at that company, or we called the company and got the address. We were creative about that. And then we basically just emailed them and said, look, here's your Facebook page. We already created it for you. Here's a wildfire campaign. It's already there. All you need to do is just claim this page. And so we made it so easy for them, so sort of brainless, that they should try it. And bunches of them ignored us and never tried it, but enough of them. And so actually we still ended up sometimes 3 or 4 years later owning these Facebook pages for brands that, but enough of them gave it a go that again was a way for us to be able to, next time we're reaching out to a company, to say, well, Pink has used our campaign and Nixon Watches has used our campaign. So, trying to just get those initial reference customers in any way that you can by making it as seamless as you can, I think really worked for us. And then the other thing I'd mention about that period is, one thing I learned is, probably everybody's learned it already, but I'll just mention it. Persistence was everything. And I see it myself. Like someone might email me today asking for something, and I'll read it and I'll have every intention of replying, but it gets lost in my inbox and I forget about it. And if that person, messages me again politely and says, hey, did you see my message? Then very often they'll get a response. And if they don't, very often it just gets lost, even though I didn't intend to not respond. And so certainly through that early period, realizing that you cannot try once with a brand and then give up. Like trying 10 times is probably a little obnoxious and stalker-like, but at least trying, being very persistent, I think was really important and really paid off.
I definitely find that I will email people like 3 times and then I'm done, but usually they reply.
I think 3 is the magic number. I totally agree. I don't mind someone messaging me 3 times. After that, it's a little much.
But also having like, how important is the message for you, and what grabs you? Are you like a long form person or a short form person?
Right. Exactly right. Yes. Well, for me, short form is great. Even though I have a hard time writing short emails. But.
So for lots of questions coming through. So Angie Judge, for Wildfire, did you focus on a particular part of the market, e.g. by geography, vertical, customer size in the very early days?
Good question. Hi, Angie. Nice to see you on here. Let's see. In the very early days, no. Well, we did. So we would take any customer we could get, and we were fortunate in the early days to get a decent amount of inbound interest. So obviously, whatever came inbound, we were interested in. But we did, as I just sort of alluded to, we did try to focus on what we thought was the low-hanging fruit. Like what were the businesses that we thought would really do well on Facebook and really ought to be on Facebook. Because remember back in those days, we weren't just trying to sell our product. We were trying to sell Facebook as a tool for businesses. It was early enough that believe it or not, back then, many businesses totally were not interested in being on Facebook. So in those early days, we focused on, like I said, movie studios, talent managers, concert promoters, and then really brands with cachet, like brands that people really love and therefore would want to connect with on Facebook. So that's how we started, until we got to the point where we felt like we had we hadn't saturated that market, but we're basically it was getting we'd picked through the lowest hanging fruit in that space, plus we'd built our sales team enough that then we started moving out into other verticals. And so at that point we segmented our sales team, and I'm trying to think how we segmented them. We segmented them by industry and geography. So we had big geographies, like the UK was a geography, West Coast was a geography, East Coast was a geography. And then within that, we had people segmented around particular industries that they'd go after. And that made sense, because then they would, geography was segmented because of time zones largely. And industry was segmented because then any given salesperson would develop some kind of expertise in an industry and really sound like they knew what they were talking about when they were talking to a prospective client.
Awesome. That's a good answer. Lots of questions coming through. So would love to hear more about the early scaling experience, building a sales team that crossed from founder-led to company capability. Another one from Andrew. And also, I guess, starting to actually, one thing observationally, it's pretty interesting when you sort of compare like building New Zealand sales teams to US sales teams, and kind of the importance of hiring the right people, incentivizing them, but also how do you actually educate them as well?
Mm-hmm. So we experimented a little bit with this in the early days, but we eventually settled upon a model where we hired pretty inexperienced salespeople and trained them up. So I guess that's just sort of the education piece. Basically our model in the end was we hired mostly young people straight out of college or straight out of university, or with a couple of years work experience, who we felt like exhibited the qualities of someone that could be successful in sales. We loved people that came from team sport backgrounds, who sort of had showed that both the team playerness, but also the competitiveness. We liked people that had some kind of, had sort of risen above it all to get to where they'd got to. Like maybe someone who'd had to work several jobs through university and a whole bunch of things in order to get to where they'd got to. So we'd look for those basic raw talent, and then we would put people into our what we called it our AE program, which was basically entry level. You were just sending out emails to prospective leads on behalf of another salesperson and doing effectively cold calling. So it was a real boot camp, but during that time while you were doing that, we literally put you through a training program. Like we gave you classes and you had tests at the end. And after that, you graduated to become a fully fledged salesperson. Or if that hadn't really worked out for you, because you saw it pretty quickly, it was a really pretty hard grind sort of a job, then you either left the company, or more likely than that, you moved into another role into the company, like an account executive or a customer service person. So that was sort of how we brought people into the company quickly and trained them up and sorted out who was good and who was not good. The other thing that is worth noting, I think, is we had a really high commission-based sales compensation. So you had a very low base salary, basically the lowest that we could legally pay, because there are certain minimums, and then really generous commissions. So if you were successful in sales, you could make a lot of money. Like some of our salespeople were making a lot of money. If you were less successful, then it was really hard to make money. And frankly, it was rather hard to make ends meet. So again, that sort of sorted out who was really good at sales and who wasn't. The other thing that did, quite frankly, is it really helped us with our cash flow, because we paid out commissions once the customer had paid us. So from a cash flow standpoint, that really helped the business. And then I guess the third thing I'll mention is we had a sales operations team that was really good at just understanding our sales metrics. So we we used Salesforce really well, and we engineered it to the nth degree, basically so that we really understood the sales pipeline for any given salesperson, what their productivity metrics were. We just had a very good insight into how our sales team was performing at an aggregate level and at an individual level.
How did you decide that Salesforce was kind of the right tool for you, or was it like the only one at the time?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because in fact, we really didn't want to be a sales-driven company at all. And I distinctly recall the first 3 salespeople that we hired. I told them, we're hiring you. It's like, we're not going to be a sales-driven company, but we have so many inbound leads from larger businesses that really require a salesperson to close the deal. Because at the time, the product, you could just sign up online and just use it without talking to us. But, you know, when you get, we quickly discovered that we could have that product, but we could charge much more for a white label version of that product. So basically, you could use kind of exactly the same software, but if you were a large brand, we would take away all the Wildfire branding, and you could brand it however you wanted. And larger businesses were willing to pay 20 times more for that, basically. But that required, you know, if you're charging a business $5,000-$10,000, it requires a salesperson. So those first salespeople that we brought on, I remember telling them that, hey, we just have so much inbound interest from large brands that we need you to help with these deals, but that's not where we're going. And so, you know, we may at some point transition you to some other role in the company. Because really what we wanted to be was a business for smaller businesses to just sign up online and use the product self-service. But 2 things happened. One is we discovered there really was great demand from large businesses. And the other thing we discovered is even if you have a really low price point with small businesses, they still want to talk to you on the phone, and they still want lots of customer support. And so it was apparent that it wasn't going to be as scalable as we thought to go after small businesses. And it was really hard to charge them enough to cover the level of support that they wanted.
That's a really cool question. Can you give some advice just to close out that question on sort of transitioning from founder sales to your first sales hires? Because it's something that, you know, a lot of our founders have to go through, and I know that they find it a little bit difficult, especially handing over the reins to someone else. It's like handing over your baby, and you're a little bit like, ooh.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, you know, the first sales hire was someone who was far more experienced in sales than I was anyway. So in part, I felt okay about that because, like, well, you know it better than me. But obviously, there's an aspect of you understand the product so much more. So, you know, our first salesperson was Derek. I remember I had him sit in on a bunch of calls with me. Our sales process, by the way, was largely phone-based. It wasn't in-person visits. That happened later. But in the early days, and frankly, the majority of our sales happened over the phone via webinars, basically. So he sat in on a bunch of sales demos and calls with me, and then I sat in while he did a bunch. And then after that, I led him to it, but we shared a desk. He sat like just across from me, so I could always hear what was going on. So, you know, I felt like I got pretty comfortable pretty quickly, but I think it's a little different if you're doing large enterprise sales where you might, you know, only do 10 sales a year, but they're worth a lot of money, because if you screw up any one of those, it's dire. Versus in our case, we were doing lots of small sales. And so if he cut his teeth on a couple and messed them up just a little bit, and I actually recall his first sales call, it was a total mess now that I remember. It was not the end of the world, because it was, you know, we were going after small to mid-sized companies where we could lose 1 or 2 and it wouldn't kill us.
So, and someone's just sort of asked a follow-up question, which I think, so small businesses basically self-served on the platform, and that was how they sort of got up and running over time?
They were meant to, yeah. So the product was such that you signed up, you create an account. We tried to make that as easy as possible. So I think it required your company name and an email address. That was it. And then you got into the product, and you could go ahead and create any campaigns that you liked. You could choose a photo contest or a giveaway or a sweepstakes or whatever. And only when you got to the point of wanting to publish it, did we charge you. And so the idea there was that you got to play around and do as much with the product as you possibly could, except actually launch a campaign. And we debated a lot whether it should be a free product. but it like a freemium model. In the end, we decided we wanted to at least charge something. It was pretty token. The lowest, cheapest plan, I think, was, what was it? 99 cents a month or a day, or it was something really $4.99 a month, I think. But in the end, we decided that we wanted businesses to pay something, even if it wasn't a whole lot, because in order to be successful with our product, you had to put a little bit of effort in. You had to think of a good campaign, you had to put in some decent creative, and you had to promote it. So we were concerned that if we let a bunch of people just use it for free, they wouldn't be very serious about it. Then they wouldn't have success, and then we'd get, bad retention numbers, and people would say it was not a good product. So in the end, we sort of settled on, let's make it as easy as possible to get someone in there, allow them to use it as much as they like, except actually run a campaign, but charge them something for running a campaign. And that's what any business could do. But large brands, there was an option on our website that said if you, so there's the full pricing plan, you could sign up. If you wanted to do a white label version, then you had to call us. And so that's where the sales calls came in.
Cool. There's kind of a question on that, which I think you pretty much answered, but I'll ask it anyway in case you want to add anything, which was with Wildfire, how did you set price, and was it a loss leader strategy to begin with?
Yeah, I sort of answered it, but not fully, and it's a really good question. There wasn't a lot of comparables in our space, so those initial prices that I mentioned that we had on our website was a combination of looking at other softwares that are out there, like SurveyMonkey or that kind of thing was a decent comparable, I think. Plus looking at what do we think was reasonable for a small business to pay, but not, would not be too much of a barrier to them trying out the product. So that was the pricing on the website. And we sort of just did it by guessing to a large extent and looking at what was out there. For the white label plan, that was more interesting because we didn't publish the price online. And so actually we just tried it on the fly. Literally, we would do a sales call and say, it's $2,500. And the company would say, sure. And so next time we're like, to the next customer, it's $4,000. And then say, sure. So the next one we try $7,000 until it feels like you hit some kind of barrier. So it was a little bit of just, because the market was new enough, we didn't know exactly what to charge. It was a little bit of trial and error. So when it's opaque like that, we haven't actually published it, you can sort of experiment a bit.
What was the biggest number that you put out that you were nervous that they agreed to, and you were like in your head like, oh my God?
Yeah, well, I think we sort of hit our limit. I think we used to charge about $15,000 for our most robust campaign. So I imagine perhaps we tried 20 and that didn't really work. We left it at 20 at 15. That was the early days of the company, by the way. Later, we actually turned it into a subscription model. So in the early days, you ran a campaign, it made sense to charge by campaign. But as we built out the product and built in a lot more tools that you could use on a daily basis, then it started to make sense to have a subscription product. And that was a lot better for a number of reasons. Venture capitalists love subscription products because it's more predictable. It is more predictable, so it helped us from a predictability cash flow standpoint. So all round, that was a good move. But obviously, you can only have a subscription product if it makes sense to have a subscription product. Early days, it didn't. Later, it did.
Awesome. Lots of questions coming through. So you mentioned that you have introduced more management to your team earlier. What would be your top recommendations for balancing the need to continue pushing growth versus consolidating the chaos?
Let's see. Well, I always think, I think on the whole, people do it too late. So if you're starting to think, maybe we need a little bit more management structure, then you probably absolutely do. Not least of all because it takes a long time to find the right people. So I would say before you think it's necessary, start looking to build out your management team, particularly because then it'll enable you to not have to do what we did, which is we were so desperate, we didn't have time to go out and hire people externally. So we plucked people from inside the company. Some of those people were the right call and some of them weren't. So in general, this all depends on are your revenues supporting this kind of growth? Can you support the growth? But assuming the revenues or the capital you have is there, then having that level, in our experience, as long as you brought in good leaders and good managers, people really liked it because they like to have someone there to support them. They like to have someone to help teach them. They like to have someone there to help manage their growth as an employee. So I don't feel like we ever got pushback from employees saying you've added too much structure or too much management to the company. In our case.
There was sort of a link as well that I think you might have sort of covered, but it's a good question. So company culture-wise, as you scaled rapidly and started working with big brands and channels that expected a certain level of performance and due diligence, how did you manage hiring qualified people and maintaining a startup culture? And did you ever conduct a restructure of any kind?
A what structure?
Restructure.
Oh, restructure. They said a roof structure. We did have a roof. Let's see. Well, you know what? That's a really great question because we were dealing with large brands, but one of the things that ended up being a strength of Wildfire, I think, is that our company culture was our clients could experience and sort of feel our company culture. So we focused a lot on company culture, and we really wanted to create the kind of place where employees love going to work, where they really felt like they could speak out and be heard, where they really felt respected, et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of these, things that we really valued a lot for creating, I think, a collaborative, transparent kind of an organization. And as part of that, I think we hired people that were just really, on the whole, positive. Like if I could pick one word for the kind of people we hired, and I didn't realize it until later, it was optimistic. We hired really optimistic people. And in fact, when I look back, it was some of the real pessimistic kind of whiny people that really stuck out like sore thumbs. And so I think this is a long way of saying, I think our style with our clients was a little quirky and startup-y and, not polished, but it was extremely dedicated and friendly and educated. Our team was really well educated about social media best practices to the extent where our clients actually, many of them actually really kind of loved the company beyond the product. They just they had a good feeling about the company. And so I think our team members actually managed to express that in the way they dealt with our clients. It was better than if we just had a bunch of kind of hyper polished, hyper experienced, really grown up people in the room.
But buttoned up people?
Yeah, buttoned up. That's the right word.
So it kind of seems, reading between the lines, that because social media was pretty new back then, right? And so reading between the lines, it's like you really kind of established yourself internally and externally as a leader in the space. But how did you actually kind of publish that or become a thought leader sort of externally in the global stage, for lack of a better word?
Yeah. So and this was a big part of our marketing strategy and was very successful. I think, a big part of our business was not just providing software for managing your social marketing, but providing best practices and advice. So we put a lot of time into our social media channels in terms of providing really valuable advice. I remember we used to have Ask Us a Question Fridays where anyone could ask us a question about their social media campaign and we'd give advice. We had a lot of webinars that were pretty successful. We did some white papers, although that sounds a bit formal. We didn't do much of that. But just really, we did a lot of, and that really worked well. We got quite a lot of data from our clients' campaigns about what kind of campaigns are most successful or most engaging. And then we would use that data to both publish our own results, but also to get the media interested. So often we were able to get, not often, but sometimes we were able to get newspaper articles published sort of about social media best practices based on the data that we had access to. So that's sort of
print newspaper.
Sorry.
One's
was that
print
articles? Is that what you just said? Yeah, print. More some print articles, but this was more like Mashable and TechCrunch and that sort of stuff, and marketing blogs and that sort of thing. But so that was sort of how we established our reputation as a thought leader. The one thing that I think we didn't do enough of is establish, be aggressive at making the public understand how well we were doing. Like we kind of like one of our values as a company was humility, and we tried to really live that. And so we tended to sort of talk down how well we were doing in terms of customer numbers and growth. Whereas we had this other competitor who ended up doing extremely well. There's sort of 3 companies in the space that did really well. They raised a lot more money than we did, and they were extremely aggressive in terms of they put billboards in airports, and they put full page spreads in magazines, and they were, as much as they could be in the media talking up their customer numbers and growth numbers, they were. And at the time we sort of thought, billboards in airports, that's so silly. And it largely was, except it really established them in the minds of investors and acquirers that they were the biggest company in the space. And as it turned out, even though I think they raised 10 times more money than Wildfire, once we actually got access to their numbers, we figured out we were the same size as them in terms of revenues, but we hadn't done a good job of telegraphing that to the market. And so I think when it came time to raise money or be acquired, people put us in the bucket of being the number 2 company in the space. Whereas in fact we were, kind of neck and neck with another company. So that was something I learned, that actually making sure PR is mostly for your customers, but actually it's for your investors and potential acquirers as well.
How very Kiwi of you.
Right. You're right.
What was the average revenue per account, if you're allowed to answer that?
So the average subscription when we were at subscription price was around probably about $30,000 to $40,000 a year was a typical subscription size.
What social media platforms did you utilize to build your brand, and what was your favorite platform? I'm assuming it's Facebook, but
Facebook was the most important for us. Yeah. So certainly for our product, so i.e. our customers, our product was most heavily utilized on Facebook. And for our business itself, in terms of building an engaged fan base, and Facebook was the most important. Twitter as well. We used YouTube, but really Facebook was the most dominant one.
Awesome. This is an interesting question from Edwin. Hello. How businesses use Facebook and social has obviously changed a lot since Wildfire. What do you see as the current or upcoming areas of pain need for businesses on Facebook or social, given how much it's changed?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to be totally honest that I feel like I'm really out of the loop. And to your point, it's moving so fast that I'm sadly not the person to listen to on that topic anymore. But certainly, as I was sort of exiting that industry, so, I was involved with Wildfire for a couple of years after we were acquired by Google. So that was to 2014, I guess. And then I've largely not been involved in social. But at the time, what was really happening was just this real transition towards paid marketing on social. So during Wildfire's sort of heyday, it was much more about earned media and building up your audience and engaging that audience. And I think that's probably still important, but Facebook made it much harder to do that successfully over time, and really sort of required you to have to put money behind it. So I think the balance shifted quite a lot to paid advertising on social, which I think can be highly effective, and the level of targeting you can get is amazing. But that was sort of a shift in the industry. And then the other thing, obviously, is there's all sorts of new platforms. So Snapchat and Instagram would be absolutely critical to our customers today in a way that they were basically non-existent when we were heavily involved in Wildfire.
Instagram is becoming increasingly one of our biggest channels at the landing pad, which is very
interesting. That is really interesting. Yeah, wouldn't seem like the most obvious fit.
A lot of our direct messages actually come through Instagram now, which is quite bizarre. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but also I just had a tweet from one of our youngest community members who's like 17. He said, I'm trying to watch the Kiwi Founder series in history class, but the teacher wasn't happy. But I'd learn a lot more from watching it if he'd let me.
That's nice. Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe it's a demographic thing that's coming through on Instagram.
Yeah, probably. Looking back at your success with Wildfire and sale, did you expect that big outcome? How much of it was planning and how much of it was luck?
Yeah. No, when we first started out, we would never expected that the company could get that big. By the time we sold, I guess we knew we were approaching a valuation like that, although even still when Google put the term sheet in front of us, it was a bigger number than we were expecting. But I think it was a combination. So the lucky part was that we got into an industry in the fairly early days of that industry. We were not the first ones to get in, but we were among the first. And it was a really big growth potential industry. So we were lucky to have good timing. But then, there were about 100 other companies that got in, either before, the same time, or after us. And a lot of them didn't succeed. So there's obviously an element of executing well. So it's part luck, part execution. But in terms of sort of the planning piece, we certainly did not start out saying, okay, this could be a $500 million business and we'll sell to Google and let's plan accordingly. But I would say we set ourselves like an ambitious goal, what felt ambitious at the time, and we worked really hard to get there. And as you start approaching that goal, then you realize, like, we can be more ambitious here. Let's put the bar higher. So you put the bar higher and you work towards that, and then you keep working your way up. So I think we never at the beginning believed we could get to that point, but we set ourselves a high bar and then realized we could get there and set it even higher. And by stepping and planning towards that, then we got to the eventual outcome that we had.
Awesome. 9 minutes, so many questions. Learnings from scaling the sales team and things to avoid from a leave at Cami.
Let's see. So I think what I mentioned before, like really investing in tools to understand and assist your sales team. So Salesforce, in our case, was great, but we didn't just use it the way it was. We really engineered it to have great visibility into the performance of our sales team. So invest in that backbone, and also invest in all the support that your sales team needs. So materials. So we would have a whole team that was putting together best practices materials for a given industry. So best practices, social media best practices for the retail industry, and put that in the hands of our sales team so that actually they could have a sales call that started with, hey, I'm just going to tell you about best practices, and then it moved into trying to sell the product. So providing the sales team with all the support that they need. We, in a similar vein, we invested heavily in a marketing team that basically cultivated leads and tried to create warm leads and then filter them over to our sales team. So all of those webinars and things that I talked about were all dedicated to generating a mailing list that we, that we get companies to sign up. We would look if a company had both signed up. I think we used Marketo for this. Had both signed up for a webinar and they'd been on our pricing page. Boom, send that to a salesperson because that's a warm lead and get it. So support the sales team was really important. And then getting the compensation right, I think, is really important. In our case, I think we had a compensation structure that really incentivized good salespeople, and that worked really, really well. Things that we did wrong or could learn from. We grew pretty fast, so we definitely had. We had a lot of mishires, but like I said before, we had that kind of filtering system. So that 6-month kind of training program enabled us to sort of hire a bunch of wrong people, and they filtered themselves out. So I don't think it was detrimental, but for sure it was always a bit of a headache when you get the wrong people in. And then the other thing we had trouble with was when we moved to subscription model away from campaign pricing, we had trouble for a while predicting what our sales numbers were going to be. We sort of were good at it, and then we weren't good at it for a while. And that's really disorienting for a sales team when you're setting them targets and you can't reach them. And then you're unsure, did you set the wrong target, or is your sales team not performing? And, you know, the sales team is so motivated when you're hitting targets, and when they're not hitting targets, it's so demoralizing. So for a while there, finding that balance between hitting a good target, creating an ambitious target, but not so high that people can't hit it, I think was tricky for us.
And I know just in Kami's case, you're trying to hire a few sales people. Do you think that given the nature of the market that New Zealand is, that it's small and sales talent might not necessarily be around, do you think that the answer is potentially to develop a robust sales sort of education program that we can take grads out of and put them through it, and that could be how we sort of start to hire talent here?
That's what worked for us. And honestly, what I learned from what does it mean to be talented in sales, the people that were far and away the most successful salespeople at Wildfire, our number one most successful guy was the most soft-spoken, low-key kind of guy you could ever imagine. I bet no one would pick him out of a lineup and say he was going to be our best salesperson. He was super hardworking. So honestly, the skill that was most important in a salesperson being successful was how hard they worked. It was the number of calls that or outreaches that you made, the dedication or discipline with which you followed up, and your ability to build a relationship. So what was really good about our best salesperson, he was pretty quiet spoken, but he built trust. And then when he sold a client, he would quietly ask them, do you know anybody else that might like our product? And they would make introductions for him. So I guess what I'm saying is these are all skills that you don't need an experienced salesperson to have. Like, you can find those kind of skills in any person. I think you need to teach them about the product, and you need to teach them about the sales process. So, I know I learned a lot from some of the more experienced people in our sales team about kind of how do you find the right person in an organization, because there's all kinds of different decision makers and gatekeepers. And I don't think that's self-apparent if you haven't been a salesperson, but all of that can be taught. So I think particularly if it's more of a tele-sales or phone-based sales, I would totally take someone who's a young recent grad, because they're also less expensive than we would have had to raise a lot more money if we'd been hiring seasoned 15 years, experienced salespeople who required a huge base salary.
I have two quick questions, and we're almost going to run out of time. So what was your metric? They kind of say that you should have one metric that's like your golden metric that you focus on always. What was yours?
Well, we probably weren't good enough to only focus on one. It's probably a good thing. I would say we didn't focus on only one. But if I had to pick two, it would have been revenue on the sales side, and then on the product side, engagement of the product. So how engaging were the campaigns that we were running on our product?
Awesome. And then I kind of want to know how you figured all of this stuff out, because the lifetime of the business was like 4 years. So if you're building the business, getting customers, scaling, getting to 400 people, hiring, doing absolutely everything, it doesn't really leave you that much time to it's a lot. So what kind of did you do as a founder, or kind of is that just what you're like as a human being?
Well, we did a lot of learning on the fly. So I remember starting this didn't happen very often, but I distinctly remember January 1st or whatever the first day, January 5th, the first day back at work for the few years that we ran Wildfire, being like, okay, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to spend more time reading in the business than I'd spend the first week, because people were still on vacation. So it was sort of quiet, doing lots of reading. And I'd say, this is amazing. And then, of course, week 2 rolled around and everything became chaos, and you're making decisions on the fly, and all that flew out the window. So the truth is, I didn't spend a whole lot of time, reading management books or blogs or anything like that. And I also, probably to my detriment, but I didn't spend a lot of time cultivating mentors, because I felt like I didn't have enough time for it. I don't think that's necessarily advisable. It was just me. But we did we did like really work well as a team, I think. So, there are a lot of smart people in the room. And I think when challenges came along, I think we tried to have the kind of culture where we'd sit down and transparently hash it out. And if you have a few smart people in the room and you're willing to listen to each other, then it's amazing what you can figure out. So I would say that's largely how we made decisions. Plus, of course, you just make lots of mistakes along the way. You have to when you're moving that fast. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. So I think we also made mistakes and learned from them. We made plenty of hiring mistakes, but we learned that we had to get rid of people quickly. When our gut said, this is wrong, then it was wrong, and we got rid of people. We didn't dilly-dally about it. And so, you also, you make mistakes, but you have to be able to react quickly and to fix them.
I'm going to do maybe 2 more questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure, no problem.
In retrospect, how much of your success do you attribute to the freemium model versus the focus on your inside sales team? The context is our company, Mishguru, a Snapchat-focused equivalent of Wildfire, so far hasn't gone freemium or competed with people in that space, but we wonder if that's still an effective way to bring enterprise companies our way.
In the end, our company was 9. So we kept that free product up for the lifetime of the company, or not free product. It was, just cheap price. But in the end, 95% of the revenues came from the sales-driven part of the business. So largely, that's what led to the success of the company. Having said that, it was a really good lead generation tool for us, especially in the early days. That may not be the case for your business because it sounds like there are other companies out there doing this, and for a variety of reasons, it might not be the right method for you. But for us in those early days, it was a really great way because people were curious about the product, curious about the space. They went to our website, they signed up. Every day we'd look at the signups. If it was a big brand, we'd give them a call. So it was a highly effective initial way to generate leads. But in the end, it was definitely a sales-driven business.
Awesome. And then I guess just to wrap up, this is probably cliche, but what's your, last or biggest piece of advice for Kiwi companies expanding and growing their businesses and who want to scale rapidly but also successfully?
Let's see, the last or biggest piece of advice. I think there's so many pieces of advice, but I think you have to think. So if you're trying to build a global business, you have to be very, very aggressive. You have to think very big. So if you're thinking big right now, think bigger than that, and be really realistic about what it'll take from a resource standpoint, particularly monetary, to get to that vision. Personally, if I'm generalizing across New Zealand entrepreneurs that I've spoken with, I see really great ideas, but sometimes a lack of big thinking about how they're going to get that product to market, especially globally, and a sort of a lack of understanding about the true competitive dynamics globally, and of course, not in all cases, but a lack of willingness to think about giving up a stake in the company in order to make that happen. And this is coming from the person who didn't want to raise money, of course. But in retrospect, that is something that you have to do if it's a big space.
Awesome. I think we could go on forever, but I'm gonna pause there. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope you found it useful, and thanks again, Victoria, for joining us. And we'll be back again next week, like we are every week, to do a bit of a broadcast with really awesome people. So have a good day, and see you later.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.